So welcome to October 31st, Zcash Arborist Call, the special Halloween edition. On today's agenda, we have core team updates, research and implementation updates, open announcements, and then the open discussion section. What are Arborist Calls? They are bi-weekly calls where Zcash protocol contributors convene to discuss upgrade timelines and process, protocol, R&D efforts, design and implementation of new protocol features, and identify blockers and unresolved issues. The purpose of these calls are to make core Zcash protocol development accessible for a wider set of participants and provide more transparency for the community at large. Anyone can participate in these calls. Anybody who's interested in learning about Zcash protocol development can register at zcasharborist.org. And if you would like to suggest a topic for discussion or present, please email arboristcall@zfnd.org to request a slot. Other ways you can get involved in the Zcash ecosystem: we have Zcash community grants, the Zcash R&D Discord, the Zcash community forum, and you can find all these links by going to zcasharborist.org. And we'll start off with core team updates from ECC and ZF regarding NU6.
Yes, can you hear me? Oh, did you want to go, Chris? I thought I heard you start to speak. Okay, I'll go. So NU6, have we done anything specific since the last Arborist call? I think everything is pretty much ticking along with NU6. Oh yes, I submitted a PR for the final clarifications of the NU6 specs. The least authority audit has been published. It's on one of the GitHub tickets. I'll link it in the chat. Other things to do with NU6.
Current, at least as visible by my CEDA, current updates to the good peer set is about I'm seeing around 30 nodes that are on NU6 compatible, and around 50 nodes that are not yet. So that's kind of the distribution. However, in the the 50 Zcash D nodes, again, these are the ones in the good set that my CEDA determines will be advertised. So there will be more nodes that are not visible there. But the Zcash D 510 EOS is, I believe, next week. I think Tuesday next week. So we should see a wave of updates to 6.0.0 in the next week as people hit that EOS halt and update their nodes.
Anything else, or anybody from ZF on NU6? Alfredo?
Yeah, so for NU6, in the last 2 weeks, we added a release with the mainnet activation height. We added a document in the Zebra book about the private testnet that the ACC did with the Zcash Foundation. So yeah, we published the results of that into a book page. And we also updated NU6 related documentation in the code base. And we did a release with all that. Yeah, I think that NU6 is kind of passed now for Zcash D and Zebra D.
Yeah. I believe that the mobile SDKs, at least that we've had obviously since Zcash D 6.0.0, we've had corresponding Rust crate updates with support for NU6, and those at this point have made their way out into the mobile SDKs as well. So like Zashi, Edge, Unstoppable, anyone who's depending on the current versions of the mobile SDK crates, those wallets should also be NU6 compatible at this time.
Great.
How do you know? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alfredo.
Yeah, I was going to ask Brad, how do you know the nodes that are upgraded? Do you do an RPC call to get the consensus branch ID, Brad?
You mean how do I know for my own metrics?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
so
think
how do you know? Yeah.
So I operate one of the DNS seeders, and so the DNS seeder code has this big dump file that it generates with just every node it's ever seen and the current statistics. So it's like a text version of what's in its database. And I've just got some scripts that go through that and extract from that the nodes that it is currently advertising. So a very small fraction of the nodes it's ever seen will be classed as quote unquote good based on the metrics that it decides that this is a good stable peer to advertise for the network. And so I just have scripts that pull those out to see what the current set of good nodes are by node version.
Yeah. Can you summarize what the criteria are for a good node? I know it has to be able to connect with the right version.
It's a bunch of things, namely the yeah, obviously has to be serving the current protocol version that is peer-to-peer protocol version, and so that obviously changes across the network upgrade boundary. So that's the thing that defines whether a NU6 or a network upgrade is supported. It also does things like it must be publicly reachable at the default port of 823. 28233, whichever one it is which is the P2P port. Because obviously DNS only can advertise IP addresses, it can't advertise ports. So any node that isn't accessible at the default port is by definition bad in this context. And similarly, it then looks for, well, it must be reachable, you must be able to connect to it. It checks things like, are you on the same chain as we expect? Do you have good uptime? So it's tracking uptimes, both short term over the last hour or two, back to the last month. And it's looking at a bunch of bits related to that for, is this a peer that would be good to tell other people to connect to? So this is all code that was implemented for Bitcoin that we ported to Zcash. So yeah, it's the same thing I've been running for years, and that I've been using for these metrics.
Yeah, I think Zebra, there is some user agent in the peers, I think, and I think we check that because we upgrade with every release. We upgrade the user agent stream, but it's not a very good way, I guess, to check if they are good enough.
Yeah, because the seeder actually connects. The seeder is connecting over the peer-to-peer network protocol to fetch that version information and things. So in addition to that, like it has to be able to do, successfully complete a handshake. So anything in the version negotiation piece that relates to the upgrade process inherently gets checked there. Anyway, I think we should put a cap on that for now and move on.
Okay. Any other comments or updates on NU6? All right. Next slide here. Core team updates from the Zcash Foundation on Zebra.
Yeah, I guess that's me. So yeah, apart from what I said, that Conrado wrote that private testnet guide for the test we did with ECC. Not sure if it was mentioned, but we added the cookie authentication method to the Zebra RPCs. And then we added the new SIG activation heights and created the version 2 stable release. We had a release candidate before. However, we had a mistake with some of the package increase.io, so we had to release the patch 2.0.1. which is the one people should use if they are expecting Zebra to pass NU6 mainnet activation. Unfortunately, if you use 2.0.0, which was our intention, that will result in a panic. So you must use 2.0.1 to pass NU6. Yeah, I guess we're a bit busy with that. Then we fixed a bug in the size metrics that are printed with Zebra D start and shutdown that were a bit off. What we are working on now, in the CI side, we are fixing the merge from external contribution into main because it keeps failing. So Gustavo, our CI, our DevOps guy, is working on that. That's kind of related to a PR Zeno house open that we already approved, but it's not merged due to that issue. Then I think Ari is working on implementing I think he's already done implementing the get block header RPC method. Cinco Monrado is working on extending the get block RPC method that has a lot of options, and Zebra only support a handful of those. So we want to support more. And another big change I am working on is we are changing the Zebra RPC framework. We're refactoring the framework to use grades that are not deprecated. Yeah, that's a big refactor, but for the end user and the people that use the API, it should be the same. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it.
Thanks, Alfredo. Does anybody have questions on Zebra? All right, we'll go to the next one. Electric Coin Company regarding Zcash D, Zashi, and the wallet SDKs. Is that Strad or Dara?
Is Chris not here?
I don't see Chris, no.
He must have succumbed to the time zone problem. Okay. I don't know what was mentioned last time because I'm currently in a time zone that means I can't make the other time slot for Arborist calls. So, but in the last couple of weeks, the main focuses have been on support stuff related to moving things along the NU7 activation pathway for zips related to that. So we've had to do along those lines. There's been a couple of different bugs that have been investigated and resolved around Zashi. Let's see if I can just find specifically. Yeah, there are a couple of bugs related to how the is shielding state was displayed. Chris has been implementing a first pass of how note management for the SDKs so that they will start splitting up change into multiple notes for better flexibility in transaction creation. And then there's a couple of other user bugs that have come up related to just error messages and things that we've spent some time on. There is work being done on refactoring the transaction builder. Well, it's work that I will be picking up related to that along the lines of enabling the transaction builder to work with PCZTs. So on the PCZT front, that's the main next thing that's been making progress, which is enabling. So I've got a little bit of meandering on here. For context, PCZTs are partially created Zcash transactions. The intention is to be effectively the Zcash equivalent of Bitcoin's PSBT, partially signed Bitcoin transaction, and enable different like hardware wallet vendors, wallet providers, service operators, and things to interoperate with when it comes to collaborating on creating a transaction. And the current status there is that the first main draft proposal for the structure of the PCZTs is up, and people have been giving feedback on it. There's a few more fields that need inclusion and updates there, but once those additional fields are in place, then the fun, hard problem of deciding what encoding to use is my next task there. Which and in particular deciding what properties we want from the encoding. So that's the thing I'm looking into at the moment from that regard. Yeah, the transaction builder stuff changes I was mentioning relate to being able to take the Rust crates and produce PCZTs to then be able to use them. So there's work that will be happening in that vein. Trying to think, is there anything else I've haven't mentioned, Emma, in the last week or two? I think that's mostly, we haven't done much on the Zcash D side because we've been focused on NU7 primarily.
Yeah, I was just looking for Zcash D PRs and they're basically aren't any. Just trivial.
The main things we've been doing related to Zcash D have been focused instead on the Zcash D wallet replacement, and so that's been where the changes in the Rust and so on have been part of heading along that.
Did you mention that? Did you mention that we'd made a start on the new
yes, yeah. So we've put as a basis for starting to put together a thing that people can use to execute on the wallet backend. We've put together an initial sort of binary that can be used, which currently does nothing, but it has all the framework for localization and commands and whatnot, just for the Zcash D wallet replacement, just as a thing that can then run the services. Because the main next thing that has to happen along those lines, along that pathway to Zcash D replacement, is being able to spin up the wallet backend that currently exists and start connecting it to the outside world from RPCs and things, to be able to some extent empirically determine what remains to be done in terms of support for the use cases and methods and things that existing Zcash D wallet users require. So getting that to the point of being able to start iterating and testing on that bit is what's currently going on that particular axis.
We have a provisional name for that wallet, which is Zollet or Zale. So ZALLET.
Yeah, Chris suggested that as based on Sale, which is a piece of armor.
Yeah, it's one of those
medieval French helmets or something. Anyway.
Alfredo?
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Do you have a link to a repo?
So it's just in the same wallet repo that we've been using for the coordination.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's whatever that current PR is up there, PR8. So I can just drop a link in chat. There you go.
Any other questions for Stratted or Emma? All right. Next up, we got Zcash Deprecation. I don't know who wants to kick that off.
Well, we just were talking about that in the previous section, so stuff is happening in that direction. Yeah, from our perspective, we just described what we're currently working on there. I think once we have that framework up, probably one of the next big things will be like I said, starting to get the so my goal for this particular binary is to get it to the point where we can integrate it into the existing Python RPC test framework, which I believe has already been at least migrated to be able to run the non-wallet related pieces on Zebra. And so what I want to get to the point of is that we can have a combination of Zebra, some interstitial, which for now we can just use a Light Wallet D temporarily, and this, to get to the point where we can start running the existing test suite against that combination, even if it's just some manual, requires a bit of manual work to get going, so that we can then start iterating on, okay, what functionality, what limitations do need to be fixed in the backend stack, and iterate that way. Yeah, that's going to be, I expect that will be a somewhat jankier integration, and we probably, we'll see whether or not we keep it, in the far future going forward, but at least for this step, that's going to be pretty critical to ensuring that that nothing gets missed.
Paku.
Oh, yeah. On the outreach front, we're keeping to nudge the different partners operating nodes. We've discovered a few that we'll be reaching out shortly. Also, we are in touch with new partners that we've met thanks to Kit from Redbridge, that we're basically trying to collect from them requirements from other kinds of blockchains like Avalanche that have an Ethereum-based structure and architecture, and we would like to know how we could better support Zcash being supported on those explorers, especially on the verge of the Avalanche and Zcash bridge, aka Redbridge, being online in the, I hope, near future. And yeah, and that's basically it. It on the outreach. If anyone has contacts they could provide, business relationships, everything's welcome. We're trying to reach everyone out there through everything, smoke signals, pigeons, GitHub tickets, Telegram messages, etc. So just message me, Billy, or Dan, and we will get on to it.
Great, thank you, Paco. Any other updates on Zcash D deprecation? All right, we'll jump to the next topic. Research and implementation updates. Zcash shielded assets. I don't think we have anybody from Kata here. Let me double check. No. Okay, we'll jump to the next.
We don't, but I can summarize the last meeting I had with them. So basically, They were talking about fees for ZSAs, and they had so identified that there are 4 cases. There's creating a brand new asset. There's then the other 3 are issuing funds in assets, burning, and just transfers using an asset. The last of those can't be distinguished from just Orchard transfers, so they obviously have to have the same fee. The issuing and burning, from the point of view of spam prevention, they don't really need to have a higher fee, because all you're doing is updating a database entry to how much of those funds, how much in that asset has been issued. But from an economic point of view, you might want to charge more for them. I don't really have a strong opinion on that, and neither did Kedit. And for creating a new entry for a new asset, that has to have a higher fee, and I think Kedit suggested 5,000 times the marginal fee. I think personally that's a little bit too high. It only needs to be, I don't know, 500 to 2,000. But that's we don't really want people creating huge numbers of new assets. And the only real limitation there is that if we wanted to allow assets to be used for individual NFTs, then high fee would obviously be disadvantageous to that usage. But I'm not sure we want to encourage that usage for the time being. I don't know. So that's fees. Does anyone have any comments on fees to start with?
I put a
don't
comment
see-
in the text messages, but I don't think we need to spend time talking about it. Just for future
Oh.
reference.
Yeah, because that's not part of ZSAs. Excuse me. And the other question was whether we should include action groups in the V6 format, but essentially turned off. So just a special case where you have one action group, because it affects the structure of the V6 format. And so if we could express enabling action groups as just removing a restriction, that might be useful for to simplify parsers and so on. So Kedit was going to go away and see how complicated that was, whether that's something they could specify in the next few days before the NU7 deadline. But if it turns out it's too complicated, then we'll just defer that.
And then I think the only other thing that we could bring up here is that the circuit audit for ZSAs, I believe, starts next week. And it's
That's Lisa
happening-
first, so audit, yes.
And the documentation that are in Zebra are currently under review. They just
People very artifacted to me. Is anyone else having problems?
Yeah, same.
just my microphone today. They've created a series of IPRs for their implementation in Zebra, and that's under review. The first two have been reviewed. The remaining three should be reviewed shortly. If that was any better.
Yeah, most of it was better. It seems it's bimodal. It's sometimes it goes very bad, and the other times it's fine.
Any
Anyway.
other comments on ZSAs? All right, we'll jump to the next topic. Frost.
Yep, that's me. Yeah, on Frost we released we made the 2.0 release final, which is very similar to the release candidate. It has a bunch of new functions exposing the API. They were already there, but they were exposing the API because they're useful for some use cases, like verifying single signature shares instead of just aggregating them, for example. But that's out. There's one interesting thing going on that some external contributors open a PR for including BIP 340 signatures or taproot signatures support. That's been kind of open for a while, but there was some work on the cool thing that's just the community work on this. We didn't have to do much, but they fixed some issues and it was now in a good shape. I reviewed it and I made some cleanups there just to be less invasive on the Frost core crate. And I think there's some small adjustments to be made there, but should get merged soon and should make the next release. And this is this is useful for Zcash because the signatures will be used for ZCA issuance. If that hasn't been changed, I think not. And this is a use case where it makes a lot of sense to use Frost, right, to protect issuance of ZSAs. So that's cool. And regarding the demo and the server, I'm going to go back. I mean, I mentioned last time that we finished the encryption authentication. So now we just need a bunch of cleanups and stuff to make the server production ready. So I probably am going to resume working on that soon. I think that's it. Yes.
Thanks, Conrado. Any questions on Frost or comments?
The BIP 340 piece, do you think there's anything? So I'm thinking from the PCZT's perspective.
Right.
Anything specific to that versus Sapling and Orchard that you think will be relevant in the PCZT format? In terms of if you were doing a transparent signing round for the round 2, because just in terms of what kinds of fields would need to be incorporated into the PCZT for conveying in either direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. I need to recall what's the format for issuance, but I think it shouldn't have like, I can't think of anything in particular that needs to be there because it's just a signature, right? It doesn't even have the randomization stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, right now I can't think of anything, but it's a good idea. I'm going to double check.
Yeah, because I want to make sure that the PCZT works for transparent Frost-based multisig in addition to shielded Frost-based multisig. Well, for shielded, it's just Frost multisig, but obviously transparent, the normal way for multisig there is the Bitcoin style multisig, but good for the Frost style to also work there.
Yeah,
I think the 340 stuff though I think that might be the newer Schnorr stuff though. So it might, the answer there might be we can't support it right now because we don't support Schnorr signatures for transparent. We only support the older ECDSA. So it might just be that we, if there's something we can have in the format that makes it potentially useful in those contexts, then it'd be good to know. Otherwise, we can just focus on shield.
Yeah, I'm going to double check. Like for Frost, the main thing that from the user's point of view, they need to like extract all the information from the PCZT to know what they're signing, right? And
which is the same as a regular hardware signer as well.
Yeah. So for the specific case of issuance, I need to look into how it's specified to know what exactly it needs to be conveyed to the user. Yes.
Yep. Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Any other thoughts on Frost? Okay. Next topic: the network sustainability mechanism.
Hey, everybody. So we have a few updates since our discussion on the network sustainability mechanism 2 weeks ago. First, I posted to the forum an update and an FAQ on the NSM and have been soliciting feedback from the community and answering questions. Second, Nate and I met with Dara Emma to discuss concerns about exceeding NU7's complexity budget, also concerns about not having demonstrated consensus for ZIP 235, which is the one that smooths out the emissions curve so that burns that can be recycled into future block rewards. So we understand and we appreciate those concerns. But given these issues, we'd like to suggest an alternative proposal. First, in response to my forum post, Conrado had mentioned, and speaking for himself, not for the Zcash Foundation, that ZIP 233, which introduces the voluntary burning mechanism, seems like a good change. and requires changing the transaction format, which will already happen with ZSAs and would be a change to have to, would be a pain to have to change it later. So theoretically, like we're open to ZIP 233 being implemented by itself as part of NU7. This is a non-controversial change, and the worst thing that could happen is it doesn't get used. Second, instead of implementing ZIP 235 into the protocol, and that's the one that burns 60% of the transaction fees, could we at some point in the future, as a precursor to a consensus level change, update the node software to default or to have an opt-in configuration that burns 60% of transaction fees? They're so small, miners wouldn't notice. And if they somehow increased, we could remove the configuration from nodes or change it. But one good thing about doing it this way is it allows us to test out the feature before implementing it into the protocol. So what this would accomplish is that, one, the voluntary burning mechanism, which again is non-controversial, would get implemented into NU7. We could test out burning 60% of the transaction fees without making a consensus level change. And then we'd hold off on implementing ZIP 234 to smooth out the issuance curve. And that would allow more time to discuss the change with the community, determine if there's consensus, and assuming that there is, it could be included in a future network upgrade sometime after NU7.
I mean, from a technical point of view, those are definite possibilities. Let's see. To me, for ZIP 235, if there is any, I guess not putting that in the consensus protocol is a simplification. So there are two options if it's not in the consensus protocol: either make it a standard rule or, as you said, just have wallets do it voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
It depends what the community thinks about those.
Well, it would be having miners do it voluntarily, not wallets.
Right, yeah, because
you could in theory do it either way, but for this particular rule, it would have to be miners. You could emulate the rule by having wallets do it ahead of time. However, the ahead of time piece will interact with the miner enforced ZIP 317.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So ignore that that option. Yeah, it would be miners who are doing it voluntarily. So in which case those so there's no distinction between standard rule and voluntary compliance there.
If what you would do in wallets, if you wanted to do this, would just be have wallets by default set. You would have a wallet option to say, donate with every transaction to the sustainability reserve or whatever it is.
That would amount to a effective fee increase. Another way of doing that would be to essentially implement ZIP 235 at the minor layer of being like the ZIP 317 enforcement is over both aspects of that. So the fees are just the fee is still ZIP 317, but where the fees go to is configurable.
I think that might
you have it so that you could alter the way that ZIP 317 fees are enforced to account for the portion that gets burned.
I mean,
but that could be done rather than it being a consensus rule. That could be done as a nodes deployed to. If you choose to burn it, then the fee is allowed to be smaller while still satisfying the ZIP 317 rules.
I mean, from the point of view of the motivation of ZIP 317 to defeat the sandblasting attack, that works fine because burning the fee is just as good as giving it to the miner from that point of view.
Yeah.
It's
So from that perspective, it would just be the node change enables wallets to test the fee locally by splitting it in that way without requiring the miners to do so themselves. But also without requiring the whole network to enforce it.
So tell me if I've got this right. Once the fee burning becomes a consensus required rule, then miners can no longer bypass the anti-spam mechanism of ZIP 317. Is that correct?
Let me think about that. So that I'm not sure that's a well posed question, because it's not miners that are. So yeah, currently you are depending on miners to enforce that mechanism.
ZIP 235 as a consensus rule wouldn't, I think, alter the anti-spam stuff at all, because it's
Right,
working.
it wouldn't.
It would be requiring a percentage of the fees to go to this burning mechanism, but it doesn't on its own enforce what the absolute magnitude of that fee is. So it's ZIP 317
it can't.
enforces the absolute magnitude. And that is not, the ZIP 317 stuff is also not currently enforced by consensus. Someone who is sufficiently motivated to spam the network and is either running a miner or collaborating with a miner is currently able to bypass the ZIP 317. It's just essentially impractical to do so, because you would have to incentivize them beyond what ZIP 317 already costs you.
You know, and
So
yeah,
is that fair to say?
There's a background noise. Can whoever has the echo on the sound turn off the microphone, because it's really, really distracting. Carry on.
So with the ZIP 317 fees, you know, miners can, there are legitimate use cases for miners, for example, for their own payouts to bypass the ZIP 317 fees.
Good point. So is it fair to say that currently the anti-sandblasting feature of ZIP 317 is enforced by the miners? So a miner could sandblast the network for no economic cost to itself currently.
That's correct.
But
I
in
mean,
order to
yes, but it's extremely expensive to do that. So a miner can only do it for blocks that they would gain anyway. So we're inherently trusting the miner not to, for example, produce empty blocks or completely useless blocks.
And also, you should, to clarify there, it wouldn't be at no cost to themselves, because in their own blocks, any transactions they introduce that are sandblasting would therefore be at the expense of transactions that could give them fees. Right now, with fees being low, it's a negligible potentially cost to them, but it is not a non-zero cost, because any sandblasting transactions they introduce displace fee paying.
Yeah, and this is also the reason to, and this is relevant in respect of ZIP 235. You don't want the fee to be too low, because it gives in that case, miners have zero incentive to include transactions. I mean, apart from reputation, which is a very weak mechanism.
Okay, thanks.
Strad.
Yeah, Jason, I had a question for ZIP 234, which I think I've raised previously, but I don't know if we've been on the same page previously about what my question was.
Okay.
So for ZIP 234, the smoothing, has there been any consideration or discussion about enabling the NSM to go out without smoothing, instead being a modification to the current halving-based mechanism?
There hasn't, and because we don't seem to think that there's a way to do that in a way that makes sense.
Okay.
In a way, like what I'm proposing today is sort of achieves that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's
Well-
essentially the thing I was trying to figure out is what does because obviously the smoothing aspect is quite simple to describe, but the effect on the network stacks, the implementations, the mining pools, and everything, there's a lot of depth that it touches. And in my head, the thing I was trying to square was is there a smaller change that is still requires the full nodes to make changes, because no matter what you're doing there, if you're changing the way that block subsidy works, you're doing emissions, you have changes in the full nodes, but potentially requires fewer or more targeted changes in the rest of the stack. And that I don't have a good sense of right now.
I mean, you could make the issuance curve look more like it does with the at the moment with the steps, and still issue the NSM. I mean, if you really want a proposal of how to do that, I can work it out.
Like the main thing, the thing I had in my head was, well, the way the current halving curve is described, it's really a percentage of the, like you can look at it as an absolute amount that is block subsidy issued each block, or a percentage of the remaining subsidy that is unissued. And if the remaining subsidy that's unissued is the thing that's now variable, you could still interpret the existing curve as issuing a fixed percentage of that on the current halving schedule. So the effect would be that it would look like the current discrete halving curve, but the actual, instead of it being a straight line across, it would be a slightly fluctuating line. But otherwise, it would be very close to the existing halving, and in particular, the halving times themselves would be unaltered. So that was the thing that I was trying to think of a way that we could find something in the middle that might work. But yeah, the proposal to just defer that and take more time to figure this out would also be a decent way to get around this.
Yeah, and to answer your question, we are definitely open to other alternatives if they make sense and they work.
Jugo?
When Strad was saying that, I've previously tried to think of other alternatives several times, and I couldn't figure out one that could actually work. Like if somebody burns some ZEC at a certain point, then future issuance at some point in the future after that is going to have to be a different amount if it's still going to end up at 21 million eventually. So other than the exponential smoothing curve that Nate originally proposed, I haven't been able to think of one until just now when Strad was saying you still have halvings. So maybe I still am not 100% sure what you meant, Strad, but are you saying it still halves every 4 years and it's still a constant rate of emission for the period of 4 years? But at the beginning of the 4 years, you set the rate for the coming 4 years, and then at the end of 4 years, depending on.
No, so even simpler than that. If you think of the way that we do the block subsidy check and consensus, we currently do it as we know based on what halving interval we're in and the max supply that will be issued, we can work out what percentage of it remains, and in this halving, what percentage of that remains gets issued in this halving interval, and therefore what percentage of that gets issued right now. And right now, all of that can be computed as an absolute value because the amount that remains unissued is well defined because issuance only goes out. There's nothing going back in. And the thought there was you just change that one place so that when you're calculating the block subsidy for a given block, you know the amount of issuance prior to that block, and you apply all the same percentage calculations, but to that number rather than what the the pure issuance curve would tell you should be the amount that's there, which is how we currently do it.
Okay, we should probably take it offline because I think that's the exact same thing that the Eiger folks already implemented for ZIP 235. So if there's a difference between what you just said and what they already implemented,
this preserves the existence of halvings. The exponential one does not. And so I should finish up this with that. If we're happy to defer this and take more time in the deployment things, then we may not need this intermediate state. My main concern is around the complexity of doing that significant a change to the way that emissions occurs. And that I expect there's going to be quite a lag in terms of getting a change like that deployed to the full ecosystem. And if we can make that change smaller, then we can potentially do it earlier. But if we're willing to take the time to do the full deployment, then we may not need the intermediate state.
I mean, I don't know why, because it's a relatively simple computation, but people seem to get the issuance wrong anyway.
Oh yeah, even with the current stuff.
Yeah. So
well,
maybe it's actually not that much of an extra lift to get them to do it right in the new way rather than do it right in the existing way.
Well, if you can, Strat, I'd really appreciate understanding your alternative proposal, because like I've tried previously to understand different or to think of different alternatives, and just now I still don't really understand the one you're proposing right now. Do you want to write it down?
Yeah, I think I understand it, and maybe Strat and I, if we have time before the deadline.
If time appearing at some point, we can try and write down what that looks like. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other updates, questions?
Oh, I had another thing that I had my hand up for, which was that so I said that part of the reason that you need some of the fees to go to the miner is to incentivize them to include transactions. So the rule we were talking about before, where use essentially burn amount plus fee in the for the ZIP 317 requirement, that is kind of self-correcting there, because if wallets or users aren't getting their transactions through, they just increase the proportion that goes to the miner. So I think that rule wouldn't really present a problem from that perspective. As long as they were permitted to send enough to the miner to incentivize it for the work that they're doing and including transactions.
Okay, thank you, Derima. I guess I'll do one more last call. Anything else on NSM? All right, we will move on. Next up, trailing finality / crosslink.
I guess that's me, and also Jose Labs. So I have been writing up the security proof for the low latency simpler version of crosslink. The proof is all working, and I hope to have a PR up for that. I don't know, maybe by early next week.
Awesome.
Anything from go on.
Yeah, for Shielded Labs, I've been focusing on the scoping for our first deployment of crosslink. Previous Arborist call, I issued a call for feedback, and I got a ton of really high quality feedback, both like big and small. my overall big picture is it seems like we have rough consensus, like most people want most of the things. So between now and the next Arborist on the 14th, I'm going to integrate everyone's feedback and circle back with them all and see if the resulting scope is acceptable to them. I guess that's it for me.
Thanks, Suko. Any questions, thoughts on this topic? All right, we'll jump forward. Oh, Alfredo.
Yes, so there, Emma, where did you say you are going to push a PR or kind of PR? To what repo?
That would be to TFL book.
Okay.
So it's electric-coin-company
Yeah.
/TFL book.
Yeah. So another question I have, more generic. I remember when we started the discussion to move to proof of stake, one of the reasons was that it's more friendly with the environment. Why do we choose this hybrid solution that doesn't get rid of proof of work? Is my question.
That's a good question. And some other people have already asked that. By the way, speaking of GitHubs, you can find the current scoping doc for Shielded Labs' first deployment of Crosslink at the Shielded Labs GitHub under the repo called crosslink-deployment. And so that's one of the things, Alfredo, that I'm currently integrating is both of those points you brought up. One is the better energy efficiency of proof of stake, and the other is why then keep using proof of work for anything.
Cool, thanks.
I mean, I can answer from my point of view.
Please.
Yeah. I am very keen on the energy efficiency properties of proof of stake. It's one of my sort of main motivations for working on this. And so why am I suggesting a hybrid approach? It's much safer. So it's something that you can do without a substantial change to the overall architecture of how nodes and wallets interact with the blockchain, especially Crosslink 2, where basically the finalized prefix it's just a prefix of the proof of work best chain. And so that's a huge simplification. But I would be much more reluctant to work on it if I didn't have a plan for how to get the environmental benefits as well. And basically, it's to switch to POSAT instead of proof of work. So POSAT is
Right. Yeah. So the idea is to go over with proof of work and then use a finality layer with other consensus mechanisms in the future.
Yeah. So POSAT preserves the property that the next block producer is unpredictable. And I personally think that's an important security property. I'll link the paper in the chat. But POSAT, although it requires ZK proofs, it's still a lot more energy efficient than proof of work. Oh, actually, it requires a VRF, and recursive proofs are one way of implementing a VRF.
Nate?
Hello. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share the progress on making an implementation of Crosslink. So right now we are working on hiring and clarifying the scope. And then the general plan is to start modifying Zebra to implement a prototype and and there's a few milestones we're interested in sort of releasing on the way to basically getting up to a point where the existing crosslink is underspecified, or there's gaps, for example, selecting which proof of stake protocol to use, or how to implement the proof of stake bookkeeping logic and things of that nature. So once we approach that phase of the prototype, my current thinking is we will begin just straw manning a design and implementing it in a prototypical fashion to make kind of a complete system that appears to work but may not be secure. And then kind of after that, or concurrently with that, we can be improving the design to aim for something that is safe to deploy. And then once we reach that phase, we'll start writing up zips and applying to get it into a network upgrade. That's sort of the sequence I imagine.
Thanks, Nate. Zuko.
Sorry, I forgot my hand was up. I was muted and I was trying to copy down those links that Dara posted. Just wanted to add, yes, and we at Shielded Labs, one of our motivations for retaining proof of work, there's a few, but one of them is that proof of work prevents an attacker from reusing spent resources in a way that proof of stake doesn't. And I don't yet know because I haven't read those papers that Dara just posted about that other thing.
All right. Thank you, Zuko. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, comments on trailing finality or crosslink? All right. We can move on to the open announcements phase. Any announcements? You can raise your hand.
I have one.
Go ahead, Jason.
Zuko, Nate, and I are hosting a Twitter Spaces event on Tuesday, which is November 5th at 1800 UTC, and we're going to be discussing the network sustainability mechanism. Chris from ECC is going to attend, and we'd like for some other engineers to attend as well. So if any of you are interested, please say so or DM me to let me know. But it would be great to have somebody from the Zcash Foundation on the call as well, just so all orgs are represented.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Paco.
Yeah, just in case any wall developer listening, just friendly reminder, already sent messages to some of them, also tweeted about it. On the verge of NU6, remember to update to the latest ECC SDKs if you're using those frameworks. If you're not, make sure you are ready to point to the right consensus branch ID on your wallet for NU6. Be up to date with the Libra Zcash crates if you have those dependencies. And if any doubts, please reach out in the R&D Discord. Everyone will be very happy to help you go through another awesome network upgrade.
Thanks, Paco. Any other announcements? All right, we can move on to the open discussion time. Anything anybody would like to bring up or circle back to? Strad?
This may be, it's sort of the previous section, sort of this section. I just wanted to remind everyone that the current deadline for NU7 zip draft submissions is early next week. I think it's the 5th. It's whatever day is the Tuesday. It's because we've got a ZipSync meeting on the day after that. So to clarify, anyone who is considering who would like zips to be considered for inclusion in NU7, and obviously we have to then figure out what combination of zips is feasible to deploy. But the zip drafts need to be semantically stable by then. Now, semantically stable meaning that any subsequent changes to the zip will only be editorial or filling out things that are already clear, specification. So there's no new specification work that would be going on after that point for those individual zips. There would still be, for clarity, for in particular, the V6 transaction format and the transaction digest, so that the SIG hash, those two pieces necessarily get specified and become semantically stable after this deadline because their content depends on which zips end up going and getting included. But the zips themselves should, and as far as I'm aware, most of them already do this, say like in what way, for example, the transaction format will need to change to accommodate this zip. So if you've got any questions about that, just ping us in the Zips channel in the R&D Discord. We've been going through and reviewing the open PRs that are there just to get the existing open PRs in a state where we can get them merged and identify any remaining questions or issues around semantic stability that we can see, so that the various authors are aware. And we're going to continue doing that this week.
Thanks, Judd. Dear Emma?
Yeah, so there are two zips that, one of them is submitted just by me and one by ECC. So the one that I've submitted is disallowing V4 transactions from NU7. So that would effectively disable Sprout. And the motivation is that there's a sort of pretty complete motivation section in the zip arguing that it's important to reduce the complexity and attack surface of the protocol. And so we need to eventually deprecate Sprout, and the deprecation of Zcash D will in practice make it impractical to get funds out of the Sprout pool anyway. So any remaining holders of Sprout funds will need to do that before Zcash D deprecation.
Yeah, because for instance, the Sprout disabling migration tool that's in Zcash D, it will simply stop working once the network upgrade that Zcash D doesn't support, which is almost certainly going to be in U7, once that network upgrade activates, because the way that it works of spending partial amounts generates change for which we won't be able to update the commitment tree because Zcash D won't be able to follow the network anymore. So essentially there is already a deadline on being able to easily get Sprout funds out of the Sprout pool, and that deadline is Zcash D deprecation.
Yeah, and so if we didn't disable the Sprout protocol, we would essentially have a protocol that is useless and is only adding attack surface and complexity, and that doesn't really make sense. So if anyone has comments specifically on that, before I go on to the next zip. Paco, what's your comments about that?
I'm sorry, I zoned out. You were saying?
You had your hand up.
Oh no.
It's easy to leave your hand up. Okay.
Yeah.
So the other zip is explicit fees. Just making the fee field in V6 explicit, which is a pretty uncontroversial change. It was relatively easy to specify. So yeah, anyone who wants to review those two zips, the 927 and 919 on Zcash zips.
Thanks, there, Emma. Any other topics for open discussion?
I missed it there, Emma. Did you also mention the memo zip that Strad has completed?
I mentioned it earlier during the ECC updates section, but I can reiterate it here, which is that the memo bundle zip has a bunch of additional changes there. It's still not quite semantically stable, and we'll be working to get it to that point before the deadline. But the short of that one, for anyone who doesn't recall from previous Arborist calls, is that instead of having a 512 byte memo per shielded output, there will instead be a memo bundle. The proposal is to have a memo bundle in the transaction, and then each shielded output gets a memo key. The properties of this then mean that you can have variable size memos, in particular, all the way up to we're proposing a limit of 10 kilobyte memos, rather than the current limit of 512 bytes. And then also you will be able to have the same memo bytes be decryptable by multiple outputs by giving them the same memo key. And as a interesting side effect of the current proposal, you would be able to have memos in otherwise purely transparent transactions. The downside being that you need to figure out how to get the memo key to the recipient, because you obviously can't just put the memo key in the transparent output because it's transparent. But there are potentially use cases for having memo data in an otherwise transparent transaction for like well-known memo decryption keys and things.
All right, thank you, Strad.
I realized there was one other thing that in the Sprout deprecation or V4 deprecation zip, which is different from what we'd previously proposed, which is that that zip doesn't propose to actually unissue the funds. So it doesn't. So it removes the need to have any Sprout specific code for consensus. But if we decided later on that we did want to retrieve those funds, it would still be possible. Now, it would be good to have feedback on that aspect, because people may think it's fine to add that, or preferable to add that to the unissued funds for the network sustainability mechanism. So there's an interaction between those two zips, and if it's preferred, we can easily unissue the Sprout funds.
But it's also not a blocker on the zip, and in the same way that the lockbox mechanism is accruing funds without a way to move them. And that zip 233 for NSM on its own would do the same thing. This would just be another case of any remaining funds in the Sprout pool would be frozen at that point, and a decision on what to do with them could be made later.
So just to clarify the interaction, if you had all three, or actually just zip 233 and 234 of the NSM zips, then that is reissuing part of the unissued funds, and then it would make a difference whether this other zip had unissued the Sprout funds or not. Okay.
Thank you, Dara. All right, I'll do one last call for any other topics. Okay, I don't see any hands. And so yes, thank you all for being here. The next Arborist call is November 14th at 1500 UTC. And please be aware of the clocks changing. Yeah, so thank you all for being here. This will get up on the ZF YouTube, and Squirrel gets the notes out. And yeah, happy Halloween. Thank you all.
Yeah. For some of us, the clocks have
Right.
already changed.
That's
So this
true.
is just switching everything back to be the same offsets, which is easy to remember.
True.
Thanks.